Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel and Iran launch new strikes with missile interceptions lighting up Tel Aviv's sky just after 2:30 a.m. local time amid the rising tensions. Iran rejects US talks under Israeli aggression while Europe pushes to keep nuclear diplomacy alive. The UK, France, Germany and the European Union urge Iran to engage in the US in Geneva talks, but Tehran refuses while Israeli strikes continue. With Trump's strike decision looming, all sides signal they'll keep talking, despite little progress. Mahmoud Khalil, a former Columbia student and key figure in US campus protests, walks free after over 3 months in federal custody. He left a Louisiana detention center wearing a Palestinian keffiyeh following a judge's order for his release. At least 44 Palestinians die in Israeli strikes, including 25 awaiting food aid near Netzarim, according to the Gazan Health Ministry. Israel says Hamas terrorists were in the crowd, and UNICEF warns children face extreme danger amid Gaza's water crisis. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is building interceptor drones to counter Russia, while Moscow confirms a new prisoner of war exchange. Putin suggests Russia may seize Sumy and calls Ukrainians one people, prompting Kiev to accuse him of disdaining peace. Romanian police are investigating Tristan Tate for allegedly violating election laws by posting political content on voting day. Tate and his brother Andrew, both under separate investigations, have over 13 million followers combined. Panama imposes a 5-day emergency in Bocas del Toro after looting and strikes over pension reforms turned violent. The measure suspends civil rights and allows warranties arrests as banana workers lead the protests. A Tunisian court sentences former President Moncef Morzoki to 22 years in absentia for undermining state security. The opposition warns of a crackdown as Marzouki accuses President Sayed of building an authoritarian regime. Now our top story today, in the latest turn of events in the Israel-Iran conflict, Iranian missiles lit up the sky over Tel Aviv and the central city of Modin, marking a sharp escalation in the confrontation between the two regional rivals. European diplomats wrapped up talks with Iran's top negotiator amid cautious optimism for future dialogue, though no major breakthrough was achieved. Just hours after the nuclear talks in Geneva concluded, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi declared that Tehran is now re-evaluating its willingness to continue negotiations with Washington. Let's take a listen in.
Iran is ready to consider diplomacy once again, and once aggression is stopped and the aggressor is held accountable for the crimes committed. In this regard, I made it crystal clear that Iran's defense capabilities are not negotiable. We support continuation of discussion with E3 and EU and express our readiness to meet again.
Russian President Vladimir Putin also addressed the growing tensions during a speech at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, sharing Moscow's position on the crisis. Let's take a listen in.
Мы ни в коем случае, хочу даже обратить на это внимание, мы не стремимся к посредничеству, мы просто предлагаем идеи, и если они будут оказаться привлекательными для обеих сторон, мы будем этому только.
In Venezuela, pro-government supporters marched through the streets of Caracas, condemning Israel's strikes on Iran and expressing solidarity with the Palestinian people. US President Donald Trump said his Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, was wrong when she claimed the US believed Iran was not building a nuclear weapon. He warned it would be very hard to stop Israel's strikes on Iran to negotiate a possible ceasefire. Trump also commented on European efforts to mediate between the two sides. Here's what he had to say.
Help at all in talking with Iran?
No, they didn't help. No. Iran doesn't want to speak to Europe. They want to speak to us. Europe is not going to be able to help in this.
To the US Geological Survey, the quake hit just as Israeli airstrikes continued to batter targets inside of the country. It was recorded near the city of Semnan at a depth of 10 kilometers. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres addressed the Security Council. Let's take a listen to his comments.
The world is watching with growing alarm. We are not drifting toward crisis. We are racing toward it. We are not witnessing isolated incidents. We are on course to potential chaos. The expansion of this conflict could ignite a fire that no one can control. We must not let.
In Haifa, Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar visited a missile strike site and accused Iran of intentionally targeting civilian areas. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot also warned that Iran's nuclear program has become far more aggressive and now poses a threat to Israel, the region, and to Europe. German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul added that the United States must play a central role in finding a diplomatic solution. In a devastating strike, an Iranian missile hit a building at the Weizmann Institute of Science in central Israel, destroying key cancer research facilities and clinical trial materials. Now in Baghdad, thousands of supporters of influential cleric Muqtada Sadr rallied against Israel's military actions, chanting "No, no" to Israel. Analysts say Iraq continues to balance its alliance with Iran and its strategic relationship with the United States. In the wake of the latest strikes, Israeli emergency crews are searching through the rubble in Haifa. Local hospitals report at least 19 people have been injured. In Yemen's capital Sana'a, supporters of the Iran-backed Houthi rebels held large protests against Israel's attacks and declared support for Gaza. Israel's army chief, Eyal Zamir, also spoke out on the ongoing campaign. Let's take a listen to him.
מהמורכבות בתולדותינו. יצאנו למערכה על מנת להסיר איום שבסדר גודל כזה, מול אויב כזה, נדרשת מוכנות למערכה מתמשכת.
We're now joined by Spencer Critchley, who is a communications strategist. He joins us from California, USA. Spencer, thank you very much for joining us. Before we head into the more details of the developments of this ongoing crisis, it's entering its 8th day now. I want to get your ninth day. Sorry, I want to get your reaction to this relatively fresh conflict and the ongoing events that are currently surrounding it.
Well, it does not look good. I think this is an extremely tenuous and risky period in history, and of course it has echoes of the lead up to the U.S. invasion of Iraq, where you have people in this country and in other capitals across the Western world advocating for a very aggressive response to Iran, especially here in the U.S., unfortunately. And while it's understandable, I mean, given Iran's record of supporting and exporting terrorism and all of the other terrible things it's done over the years, and including its stated intention of wiping out Israel and the United States and the West if it has the opportunity to do so, I don't see signs that there's a clear plan on the part of the Trump administration in particular for what would happen after military action. And that's exactly the same problem that existed with the invasion of Iraq. So as the hostilities escalate between Israel and Iran, and Mr. Trump is making these vague threats about the United States getting involved, I think it just makes the situation that much more unstable, that much riskier. And I certainly hope the world isn't about to be plunged into a repeat of what we saw with the invasion of Iraq.
Spencer, I want to now move on to President Donald Trump and how he is dealing with these ongoing tensions and conflict. Tulsi Gabbard said on March the 25th of this year that Iran is not making nuclear weapons. He has completely dismissed her. What are your thoughts on him dismissing his own security advisor like he has done?
Well, this is an extra dimension of risk here, because here we have a dispute between two people who are entirely lacking in credibility. I mean, President Trump is notoriously uninterested in his intelligence briefings. He essentially refuses to take them. There's this presidential daily brief every morning, which previous presidents have paid very careful attention to for very good reasons. And Mr. Trump can't focus long enough to do it. And there's been discussion recently about maybe the intelligence briefers should produce a Fox News style TV program for him every morning, and maybe that would hold his attention. In his first administration, they resorted to keeping the briefing to one page with pictures in order to get him to sit through it. So there's Mr. Trump on the one hand, and then there's Tulsi Gabbard, and it's been hard for a long time to tell whether her loyalties lie with the United States or with Russia or with Syria. And she also just seems to be kind of nutty. Now, in this case, her statement seems to be accurate, that the consensus of the U.S. intelligence community is that Iran is not at this moment trying to take those final steps to develop nuclear weapons. But that doesn't matter to President Trump, because he apparently gets most of his ideas from watching Fox News and from consuming social media and from whomever was the last person to bend his ear.
Yes, and Spencer, I also want to delve into his statements about talking about the Europe negotiations and saying there's no point and saying that Iran does not want to negotiate with Europe when it comes to this, and that they want to negotiate with the United States. Now, this comes just as Iran says that they're contemplating possibly completely ending these negotiations, these nuclear negotiations with the United States amidst this conflict. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, and speaking of people with no credibility, then we have the government of Iran. You know, these mullahs with their incredibly repressive regime and with their terribly aggressive attitude to the rest of the region and the rest of the, at least the Western world, and their willingness to lie their heads off in pursuit of their twisted understanding of religious destiny, combined with their evident military weakness. I don't think that they were as strong as advertised beforehand, and now Israel over the past year or two has greatly weakened them further. I don't think they have much of a negotiating position, except, unfortunately, the prospect of what would happen if their regime were to completely fall apart and Iran were to devolve into potentially Libya-style chaos with loose radioactive material in play, as well as their remaining weapons.
Spencer Critchley, thank you very much for joining us. You are staying with us. For our next story, we stay in the Middle East, where the European Union Diplomatic Service has indicated that Israel may have breached its human rights obligations under the EU-Israel Association Agreement, a pact that governs bilateral ties between the two sides. Citing findings from independent international institutions, the European External Action Service said that there are signs that Israel is in violation of Article 2 of the agreement, which states that relations must be based on respect for human rights and democratic principles. The report comes amid growing concerns across European capitals over Israel's military campaign in Gaza and the escalating humanitarian crisis in the enclave. The document also notes that Israel's ongoing restrictions on aid, including food, medicine and medical equipment, are impacting the entire population of Gaza. The examination began after EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas announced in May that the bloc would review Israel's compliance with the agreement. The decision followed strong support from more than half of EU member states for a formal investigation. Responding to the report, an Israeli official has dismissed it as one-sided and accused the European Union of applying double standards. Now we move to Europe, where Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the country is developing interceptor drones to counter Russia's intensifying drone assaults. Kiev reports that over 400 drones were launched by Russian forces in a single night, including Iranian-made Shahed drones, causing casualties and infrastructure damage. Meanwhile, Russia and Ukraine have completed another prisoner of war exchange, part of agreements reached during the recent peace talks in Istanbul. Hundreds of captured troops were freed, though exact numbers remain undisclosed. Tensions have escalated as Russian President Vladimir Putin said he does not rule out a possible attempt to seize the Ukrainian city of Sumy. Let's take a listen in to what he said.
Ну, в Сумской области глубина составляет где-то 10 до 12 километров. Где-то там 8, 10, 12 километров. Дальше город Сумы, областной центр. Ну, у нас нет такой задачи забрать Сумы, но в принципе я этого не исключаю.
Ukraine's foreign ministry condemned the comments, calling them proof of Moscow's disdain for the peace process. The US President Donald Trump stated that the United States should not be required to meet NATO's 5% GDP defense spending target, arguing other alliance members should contribute more. We're now once again joined by Spencer Critchley, joining us from California, USA. Thank you very much, Spencer, once again for joining us. Spencer, this conflict seems to be escalating. Amid all these talks of peace, we've now had over 100 days of Donald Trump in office, and we have a new conflict in the Middle East and no end to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which he said he would do in 24 hours. What are your views on how this peace process is going?
Well, I'm afraid I have little hopeful to say to you. This is another area where we see chaos all around, and we see an incoherent United States role in all of this. It's impossible to pin down what the U.S. policy and strategy would be in this conflict because there isn't one. There is Donald Trump's impulse at the moment. Many reporters are pointing out in the last few days that Trump has yet again given one of his famous 2-week deadlines for when he would decide whether to go into the war on Israel's side against Iran. And he's been doing the same thing with the Russia-Ukraine war all the way along. He's just notorious for saying, we'll have an important announcement 2 weeks from now. It's either 2 weeks or 90 days is the way it typically works out. And, you know, this is transparently cover or attempted cover for the fact that he has no idea what he's going to do, and he essentially waits till the last minute and then acts on impulse, or as I was saying a few minutes ago, he acts based on what he's seen on Fox News or what someone has happened to say to him 5 minutes before he announces the decision. And I'm not exaggerating here. I mean, his sudden enthusiasm for joining Israel seemed to have been actually literally based on watching favorable Fox News coverage of that. With Ukraine and Russia, he made the promise, as you noted, to end it in 24 hours. This is his typical magical thinking in which the entire world will bend to his wishes because somehow the force of his will is completely irresistible. And his apparent belief in that survives defeat at the hands of reality over and over and over again. And what he's doing here is also typical. He he flails around for a while and then announces he's had it with these people. And that's what we see him doing here, is saying that he's tired of talking to Russia and Ukraine, equating the two of them as if a country that was invaded is equivalent to a country that did the invading, and not only invaded, but invaded by a country that deliberately targets, tortures, and murders civilians.
Yes, and Putin has threatened to take the city of Sumy. And for the viewers who don't know, Sumy is a city of about 250,000 people in northeastern Ukraine. Spencer, do you think this is a tactical move to gain leverage in future talks, or a genuine shift towards further offensive action in the northeast of Ukraine?
Well, with the caveat that I'm not a military expert, I just say, from having been watching Putin for a long time, like so many of us have been, I think we have to assume that his goal continues to be to conquer all of Ukraine and to not stop there. I mean, he has announced this himself multiple times, that essentially his goal is to rebuild the Russian Empire. He's famously described the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest tragedy of the 20th century, not because he felt any loyalty, I don't think, to the Soviet Union as a communist entity, but because he sees it as his destiny to reconstitute the Russian Empire. He explicitly plays on his name, Vladimir, and links it to the person he thinks was the original founder of Russia, going back 1,000 years or more, who also happens to have been Prince Vladimir of what is present-day Ukraine. This is this whole largely invented mythology he has going on in his head to justify this, what essentially seems to be a psychological drive he has to make himself an emperor of a new Russian empire. So I think we have to assume that his goal is to keep fighting, keep sacrificing hundreds of thousands of his own people in the cause, hopefully, of taking all of Ukraine, and then presumably taking the Baltic states and the rest of Central and Eastern Europe, and reconstituting the Russian Empire, as I say.
Spencer Critchley, thank you very much. Absolute pleasure to get your insight on the programme. For our next story, we move over to the United States, where a US federal judge has ordered the release of Mahmoud Khalil, a pro-Palestinian protest leader and Columbia University graduate, from the Immigration Detention Center. Khalil, who had been held since March in Louisiana while facing deportation, was a prominent figure in nationwide campus protests against Israel's war in Gaza. The judge ruled that his detention was unconstitutional and found no evidence that he posed a flight risk or danger to the public. After being released from the prison, let's take a listen to what he said.
Trump and his administration, they chose the wrong person for this. That doesn't mean that there is a right person for this. There is no right person who should be detained for actually protesting a genocide, for protesting their university, Columbia University, that is investing in the genocide of the Palestinian people.
Khalil, a legal permanent resident married to a US citizen with a newborn son, was arrested under a Trump administration policy targeting foreign students involved in pro-Palestinian activism. His release is seen as a major setback to that policy, which has faced criticism for infringing on free speech rights. Khalil's family and civil liberties groups have welcomed the decision, though immigration proceedings continue. The Department of Homeland Security has expressed intent to appeal the ruling. His case draws attention to issues surrounding political expression and immigration enforcement in the United States. Now we stay in the region, where tensions continue to escalate in Los Angeles on Friday as Mayor Karen Bass publicly condemned US Vice President J.D. Vance for what she called, quote, lies and utter nonsense meant to provoke division and instill fear in the city. Bass described the deployment of federal troops as a provocation and accused the federal actions and rhetoric from Washington of spreading terror among residents. She said that federal actions have emptied local businesses more than the COVID era and caused widespread economic damage. She also slammed the presence of unidentified armed men during recent immigration raids and criticized Vance for misidentifying California Senator Alex Padilla as Jose Padilla. Here's what the mayor had to say.
The President of the United States spent 3 or 4 hours in LA before holding a press conference and spewing lies and utter nonsense in an attempt to provoke division and conflict in our city. This is consistent with the provocation from Washington that began 2 weeks ago when our city was calm and millions of Angelenos were going about working and contributing to our city. The provocation has resulted in lives disrupted, terror and fear spread throughout our city. And it's just really sad when our economy, obviously we've had the issues in the city, and to have this unenforced error. There was just no need for this to happen. And unfortunately, the last 2 weeks, you've seen a huge dip in different sectors of our economy for this unnecessary experiment and
This comes after Vance's visit to Los Angeles to meet with some of the 700 Marines and 4,000 National Guard troops deployed to the city by President Donald Trump earlier this month. Vance thanked the troops for their efforts amid protests against ICE raids in the city. He also defended the deployments and said that troops remain necessary as authorities fear a resurgence of unrest. He also accused local Democratic leaders of encouraging immigrants to enter the country illegally and failing to support law enforcement. Here's what the Vice President had to say.
Because unfortunately, a lot of these federal buildings were under very serious threat. I heard about a lot of that during my tour here today, and the reason I'm here is I just wanted to hear from the law enforcement officials themselves, the state officials, the local officials, but also the federal officials, what's actually going on here on the ground. I think there's some good news, and the good news is the rioting has gotten a lot better. But the bad news is, as I heard from everybody, unfortunately, the soldiers and Marines are still very much a necessary part of what's going on here because they're...
His visit came just a day after a U.S. appeals court ruled that President Trump could temporarily retain control over California's National Guard, while the state's Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, pursues a legal challenge. The court's decision paused an earlier ruling that questioned the legality of the president's move to federalize the Guard. In a surprising move, Japan has cancelled a high-level security meeting with the United States that was set for early July. According to a report in the Financial Times, Tokyo abruptly pulled out of the annual 2+2 talks after Washington demanded a sharp increase in Japanese defense spending, up to 3.5% of GDP. Defense Minister Nakatani and Foreign Minister Takeshi Iwaya were scheduled to meet U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in Washington on July the 1st. When pressed for comment, State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said the U.S. had no comment at this point. The Pentagon has not responded to requests for clarification. The report claims the request originated from Elbridge Colby, the Pentagon's third highest official. The Pentagon has reportedly pushed a new global standard of 5% for defense spending among U.S. allies, according to media reports. However, Japan has already committed to raising its defense budget to 2% by 2027, a major shift from its post-war pacifist stance. Japanese officials say political and economic challenges, including inflation, a weakening yen, and a key election on July the 20th, complicate any further defense spending hikes. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has indicated future budgets might surpass 2%, depending on the security environment. But Tokyo maintains that decisions on spending levels will be made independently. We move on once again. US President Donald Trump has taken credit for a peace deal between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. negotiated in Washington. The agreement aims to end the long-standing conflict in eastern DRC and is set to be formally signed next week in the US Capitol. However, Trump also expressed frustration at not receiving a Nobel Peace Prize, claiming his mediation efforts in conflicts between India and Pakistan, Serbia and Kosovo, and the Abraham Accords deserve recognition. Pakistan has officially recommended him for the 2026 prize, but Indian officials deny his role in their ceasefire with Pakistan. Critics say Trump has exaggerated his diplomatic achievements with ongoing wars in Ukraine, Gaza and the Middle East. The eastern DRC, rich in resources, has suffered violence for decades, and the New Deal builds on previous agreements made this year. Trump's peacemaking claims continue to draw both support and scrutiny. Well, that is all we have time for, and we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you.